I used to believe that a garden was just a place to grow food. But after my battle with Barbara Fenton, president of Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association, I learned that a garden could be a battlefield, a sanctuary, and ultimately, justice served on a bed of native flora. The day Barbara left that first violation notice on my door was the same day I buried my father. I just returned from the cemetery, eyes red and heart heavy, when I spotted the official-looking paper tucked under my welcome mat. Violation, unauthorized landscape modification. The letter went on to explain, in bureaucratic jargon, that my modest vegetable garden, a 10 by 15-foot patch in my backyard, violated the HOA bylaws requiring aesthetic uniformity in all visible areas. I'd started that garden the previous spring, shortly after my honorable discharge from the Army. 3 tours in Afghanistan had left me with more than just a Purple Heart and chronic back pain. The therapist at the VA suggested gardening might help with my PTSD. Something about nurturing life after seeing so much death, she'd said. And she was right. When I was out there, hands in the soil, watching tomatoes ripen and zucchini flourish, the nightmares receded. My father had loved that garden. In his final months, when cancer had made him too weak to move much, I'd will him out to sit in the sunshine while I worked the soil. "You're building something here, Samuel," he'd told me. "Not just growing vegetables. You're growing peace." But Barbara Fenton, with her highlighted bob and perpetual dissatisfied expression, wasn't interested in my peace. I folded the violation notice and set it aside. Tomorrow would be soon enough to deal with Barbara. Today was for grief. But Barbara had other ideas. A sharp knock at my door came at 7:30 the next morning. When I opened it, squinting in the early light, Barbara stood on my porch with a tablet in hand and a young man beside her whom I didn't recognize. "Mr. Ellison," she said, not bothering with condolences despite the obituary that had run in the local paper. "I see you received our notice. This is Travis from the HOA Enforcement Committee. We're here to discuss the timeline for removing that eyesore in your backyard." I gripped the door frame to steady myself. "My father was buried yesterday, Mrs. Fenton. Could this wait a few days?" Her lips tightened into a thin line. "I'm sorry for your loss, but HOA violations don't observe mourning periods. The bylaws clearly state that all landscaping must be approved in advance. Your garden," she pronounced the word as if it tasted bad, "is visible from the Peterson's second-story window and affects property values." "It's in my backyard," I said, incredulous. "Behind a 6-foot fence. Nevertheless, it's a violation." She thrust the tablet toward me. "Sign here acknowledging that you'll remove it within 7 days or face daily fines of $100. I didn't sign. Instead, I closed the door and called Terry Ortega, a high school friend who'd gone on to become a real estate attorney. After hearing my story, she promised to review the HOA documents and get back to me. That afternoon, while waiting for Terry's call, I sat in my garden. The neat rows of vegetables seemed to stand in defiance. My tomato plants heavy with fruit, the cucumber vines climbing their trellises, bell peppers adding splashes of color. My father and I had planted this garden together before his diagnosis. Every plant held a memory. My phone rang. Terry's news wasn't good. "I checked the bylaws, Sam," she said. "They're vague enough that Barbara has leverage. They require all landscaping modifications to maintain aesthetic cohesion with community standards, and there's a clause about maintaining property values through visual uniformity." "But it's my backyard," I repeated. "I know. It's ridiculous. But legally, the HOA does have jurisdiction. Fighting this could get expensive." I thanked her and hung up, staring at my garden. Something inside me hardened. Maybe it was grief crystallizing into resolve, or maybe just the soldier in me refusing to retreat without a fight. The next day, another knock. This time, Barbara had brought reinforcements. 2 more board members, Diane and Richard, flanking her like sentries. "We haven't received your signed acknowledgement," Barbara said without preamble. I leaned against the doorframe. "I'm not signing anything. Barbara's perfectly penciled eyebrows shot up. "Excuse me?" I said. "I'm not signing. My garden stays." Richard stepped forward, a conciliatory smile on his face. "Look, son." I was 34, hardly a son. "We understand you're going through a difficult time, but rules are rules. The HOA was established to protect all our property values." "My garden doesn't hurt anyone's property values," I said. "It's not even visible unless the Petersons are deliberately looking down into my yard." "That's not the point," Barbara interjected. "The point is, you didn't get approval. And frankly, vegetable gardens don't align with the aesthetic standards of Oak Ridge Estates." I looked past her to the identical beige houses with their identical emerald lawns. "And what standards would those be, exactly?" Her eyes narrowed. "Don't be difficult, Mr. Ellison. Remove the garden or face the consequences." After they left, I paced my house, anger building. The garden wasn't just plants to me. It was therapy. It was connection to my father. It was the only thing that had made civilian life bearable after Afghanistan. I called my sister Melissa that night. "They can't really make you remove it, can they?" she asked after I'd vented. "According to Terry, they can. The bylaws give them that power." "That's outrageous. What are you going to do?" I looked out the window at my garden, silvered by moonlight. "I don't know yet." But an idea was already forming, sparked by something I'd seen while hiking with my father years ago. We'd come across a patch of wildflowers, and Dad, who taught environmental science before retirement, had explained they were protected native species. "You can't build here," he'd told me. "These plants are legally protected. Developers have to work around them." I spent the next day researching state and federal laws protecting native plant species. What I discovered gave me hope. Our state had robust protections for indigenous flora, particularly those classified as endangered or threatened. Removing such plants without proper permits could result in significant fines, far more than the $100 daily fine Barbara was threatening me with. The deadline for removing my garden was approaching, but instead of preparing to tear it out, I visited a native plant nursery an hour outside town. The owner, Marcus, was a bearded man in his 60s who lit up when I explained what I was looking for. "Fighting an HOA, huh?" he chuckled. "Nothing makes me happier than sticking it to those neighborhood dictatorships." Over the next 3 days, I purchased over 300 native plant specimens, endangered milkweed varieties that monarch butterflies depend on, rare prairie grasses, threatened wildflowers, even some endangered shrubs and small trees. Marcus provided documentation for each species, including their protected status under state and federal law. The day before Barbara's deadline, I removed my vegetable garden. It hurt more than I expected, digging up the plants my father and I had tended together. But I saved seeds from every variety, storing them carefully for a future garden. In place of the vegetables, I planted my native species, creating a wild, natural landscape that looked nothing like the manicured lawns Barbara Fenton considered acceptable. I installed small, discrete markers identifying each plant and its protected status. Finally, I set up a motion-activated camera overlooking the garden, just in case. The morning of the deadline, Barbara arrived promptly at 8 a.m., Travis and Richard in tow. "I see you've removed the vegetables," she said, peering over my fence. "But what is this wilderness you've put in its place?" I smiled for the first time in weeks. "That, Mrs. Fenton, is a protected native species sanctuary. Every plant you see is legally protected by state and federal environmental regulations." Barbara's face reddened. "This is clearly another violation. You've replaced one eyesore with another." I handed her a thick folder. "This contains documentation of every species I've planted, along with the relevant laws protecting them. You'll find that removal of any of these plants without proper permits is punishable by fines starting at $10,000 per incident." Travis and Richard exchanged worried glances, but Barbara snatched the folder from my hand. "This is a transparent attempt to circumvent HOA regulations," she snapped. "The board will not be manipulated by these tactics." As they left, I heard Richard murmuring, Barbara, maybe we should consult the HOA attorney before. I don't need a lawyer to tell me this is unacceptable. Barbara cut him off. 3 days later, I received a new violation notice, this one citing improper landscape modifications and introduction of weed species. The fine was set at $200 per day until the native garden was removed. I sent a polite response via certified mail, reiterating that the plants were protected species and including copies of the relevant laws. I also contacted the state's Environmental Protection Office to inform them of the situation. A week passed. My camera captured Barbara entering my backyard while I was at work at my small carpentry business. She examined the plants closely, took photos, then left. I added a padlock to my gate that evening. The next day, I returned home to find several of my rarest plants had been damaged, stems broken, leaves torn. The camera had captured everything, Barbara returning with garden shears, deliberately cutting down some of my protected milkweed and prairie grasses. I called the State Environmental Protection Office immediately and forwarded the footage. Then I called Terry. "This is exactly what we needed," Terry said after viewing the footage. "She's not just violating state environmental protection laws, she's trespassing and destroying private property. We can go after her personally now, not just challenge the HOA." 2 days later, an environmental protection officer named Marshall Graham knocked on my door. He spent over an hour examining my garden, taking photographs and notes. "You've done a remarkable job with these plantings, Mr. Ellison," he said. "This is exactly the kind of native habitat restoration we encourage." He paused. "The damage to the protected species is concerning. The footage you provided constitutes clear evidence of willful destruction of protected plants." I felt a twinge of guilt. I don't want to cause excessive trouble. I just want to keep my garden. Marshall's expression grew serious. "Mr. Ellison, these protections exist for a reason. These species are vital to our local ecosystem. Mrs. Fenton didn't just damage your property, she damaged part of our collective natural heritage." Later that day, Barbara received a visit from Marshall and a local police officer. The fines for her actions would total over $50,000, though Marshall explained they would likely be reduced if she cooperated and admitted wrongdoing. But Barbara wasn't finished. That evening, an emergency HOA meeting was called. I received notice via email, with a subject line that made my stomach drop. "Vote to initiate legal proceedings against homeowner Samuel Ellison." The meeting was scheduled for the following evening in the community clubhouse. I arrived early, surprised to find several neighbors waiting outside. My next-door neighbor, Rachel, approached me. "Sam, is it true you planted endangered species to stop Barbara from making you remove your vegetable garden?" she asked. I nodded, explaining the situation. To my surprise, Rachel laughed. "That's brilliant! Barbara made us tear out our children's treehouse last year because it was 6 inches taller than regulations allowed." As more neighbors arrived, I heard similar stories. Barbara had been wielding the HOA bylaws like a weapon for years, targeting anyone who dared to express individuality in their homes or yards. A pattern emerged. Those who challenged her often found themselves facing escalating fines or mysterious property damage. Inside, Barbara called the meeting to order. I noticed she kept shooting nervous glances toward the back of the room, where a woman I didn't recognize sat taking notes. "We're here tonight to discuss the blatant violations by homeowner Samuel Ellison," Barbara began, her voice tight. "Mr. Ellison has deliberately circumvented our bylaws by replacing his unauthorized vegetable garden with an even more egregious eyesore of wild plants." I stood. "Those wild plants are protected native species, essential for local biodiversity. Removing them would violate state and federal law. The HOA bylaws take precedence on private property within our community," Barbara countered. "Actually, they don't," came a voice from the back. The note-taking woman stood. "State and federal environmental protection laws supersede HOA regulations. I'm Linda Montgomery from the Environmental Protection Division. We've been investigating reports of deliberate destruction of protected plant species." The room erupted in murmurs. Barbara's face drained of color. "This meeting is adjourned," she declared, gathering her papers. "I don't think so," said Richard, her fellow board member. "I move that we discuss the implications of Mrs. Fenton's actions and the potential liability to the HOA. What followed was 2 hours of revelations. It emerged that Barbara had used HOA funds to hire a landscaping company owned by her brother-in-law at inflated prices. She had selectively enforced bylaws against homeowners she disliked while ignoring violations by friends and allies. Most disturbingly, she had accepted payments from certain homeowners to expedite approval of their modification requests. By meeting's end, Barbara had resigned from the board, and a special election was scheduled to replace her. The motion to take legal action against me was unanimously defeated. As people filed out, Linda Montgomery approached me. "Your garden is quite remarkable, Mr. Ellison," she said. "Would you be interested in registering it as an official monarch butterfly way station? We're trying to create a network of these habitats throughout the state." I thought of my father, who had taught me to respect nature and stand up for what I believed in. "I'd be honored," I replied. Over the following months, my native garden flourished. Butterflies, bees, and birds I hadn't seen in the neighborhood before became regular visitors. Neighbors stopped by to learn about the plants and their importance to the local ecosystem. Some even started their own native gardens, albeit on a smaller scale. The new HOA board, led by Richard, who turned out to be reasonable when not under Barbara's influence, worked with me to create new bylaws that balanced aesthetic considerations with environmental responsibility and personal freedom. They even established a community garden in an unused corner of the neighborhood park. As for Barbara, she faced more than just HOA drama. The environmental protection fines were eventually reduced to community service hours, which she spent, ironically, helping to establish native plant gardens in city parks. The investigation into her financial improprieties with HOA funds resulted in restitution payments and 2 years of probation. 1 year after our confrontation, I was tending my garden when a familiar figure appeared at my gate. Barbara stood there, looking smaller somehow, without her usual imperious bearing. "Mr. Ellison," she said stiffly, "I've completed my community service hours, but I wanted to see your garden again. The environmental officer said it's become something of a model for urban native habitats." I hesitated, then opened the gate. We walked silently among the thriving plants, now mature and lush. Monarchs danced among the milkweed, and goldfinches perched on swaying prairie grasses. "I never understood," Barbara said finally, "why you fought so hard for this." I knelt to pull a stray weed. "My father and I planted my first garden together. After he died, and after what I saw in Afghanistan, I needed something alive and growing. Something that helped heal the world a little instead of destroying it." She was quiet for a moment. "It's beautiful," she admitted reluctantly. "Not what I would choose, but beautiful in its own way." It wasn't an apology, but it was something. As she left, I noticed her looking thoughtfully at a patch of bare soil in her own backyard. That spring, I finally planted a new vegetable garden, a small one, in raised beds at the edge of my native habitat. The HOA approved it unanimously. Sometimes, when I'm out working in the garden at dusk, monarchs resting on the milkweed and tomatoes ripening on the vine, I talk to my father as if he were still beside me. "You were right, Dad," I tell him. "I was building something here. Not just peace for myself, but a little piece of the world put right." And sometimes I swear I can hear him answer in the rustle of the prairie grasses. "That's all any of us can do, son. That's all any of us can do."